Thank you for joining us today, and welcome crew to the John Mini podcast, where we explore all things urban horticulture, indoors and out, through the perspectives of the many amazing people who have made it their career. I'm your host, Mark Mini, president of John Mini Distinctive Landscapes, and at John Mini, our team's purpose is to make places beautiful by bringing nature to the places people live, work, and play. Today, we'll be sitting down with the Chief Horticulturalist at John Mini Distinctive Landscapes, Andrew Engel. Andrew has over 11 years of experience and practice in indoor horticulture. His experience includes work on iconic landscapes such as the Ford Foundation Atrium, Urban Garden Room at Bryant Park, the Winter Garden at Brookfield Place, and the oversight of several living walls, including the largest one in New York City. In today's Project Spotlight episode, Andrew will walk us through the horticultural challenges of 3 large Terminalia Buceras trees in an indoor atrium in Manhattan. This is a project in which the John Mini team was recommended and brought in to save an existing but struggling landscape. And our conversation will provide context on the project. Andrew will share his unique role in reviving a landscape not installed by our team. He'll discuss best practices specific to Terminalia Buceras, share successes as well as the ongoing challenges on site, and the realities of our role as a horticultural team brought into a landscape rescue situation. Without further ado, let's head over to our Project Spotlight conversation with Andrew. Welcome, Andrew, to the John Mini podcast.
Mark, thank you for having me.
Always, man. You're, Andrew's a teammate. He's our chief horticulturalist at John Mini Distinctive Landscapes. I'm always pumped to, have a conversation with you. We couldn't even start this podcast because he was trying to show me plants behind him. I was like, we gotta get going. All right. Today, as you know, we'll be highlighting an indoor landscape project, also known as interiorscape projects. This project has received an award based on our ongoing horticultural care. I think it's an International Plantscape Project Award a couple years ago. Though I'll preface that with, I know a little bit about the project, that the project isn't absent of ongoing challenges, and I think that's par for the course with indoor landscapes. But we'll get into that. I think the best way to start is maybe, Andrew, you just can start by giving us some context on this project. How did we get involved and what was our scope?
Sure. So it is a residential, like a luxury residential building. It has sort of an atrium inside of it, or like a multi-purpose kind of lounge. I think it's on the 5th floor, if I'm not mistaken. But shortly after install of 3 giant interior trees, they started to fail. They were installed by an outdoor landscaping company, and they reached out to very well-known Bartlett, a well-known outdoor arborist company, and they're not actually registered to do pesticide type of treatments. They were able to understand that it was a pest issue, so they reached out to us because that's our specialty, anything indoors really, and that's sort of how it came about.
Cool. Yeah, I think was this Anthony? Anthony referred this project. Yeah. Anthony. Yeah, he works with Bartlett. He's works as an arborist and rep over there. But he worked with us. He was on our team several years ago, and he's a rock star from an outdoor horticultural perspective.
Definitely.
And he brought in the A team, us, to help with the project. So what was your role in this project? I guess were you brought in right from the get-go with the customer, and give us a little context on that.
I mean, I've had a couple roles here. When it was brought in, I think I was a regional manager for us. So I mean, really, our clear goal was to revive these trees. That was, mission critical, and that was, they really looked like they were not coming back. I mean, first and foremost, it was kind of working with, our team to come up with a program and just to start to treat them immediately.
Cool. So we're already going to it. So we brought in because these trees are struggling. Um, but there's a few, I guess, before we. So I think a lot of our conversation is going to revolve around the horticulture and care
Yeah,
of these
sure.
large trees, indoor trees. Um, but there's a few other interesting aspects to this landscape, right? So this is a residential building, a couple floors up and set. It's like a lounge or like a shared space right within the residential building. But there's a couple other aspects to the indoor landscape, correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so just to set the context for like this actual room, it's like so this building's kind of like two towers. It's connected at the bottom, but at the fifth floor where this atrium is, sort of it breaks. And so there's glass all the way up between the two towers. So actually when you look up, it's pretty amazing. It's
Cool. And
not
the glasses, which do you know what exposures are? So it's like two, like, and we'll post some pictures in the show notes, but there's like the residential towers on either side and then glass facades on just two sides, right?
exactly, yeah. Glass facades on two sides. I'm not exactly sure there, but I can tell you, there's never direct sun coming through due to just being in Manhattan.
Got it.
So it was all filtered sun, but it's kind of an extraordinary room. But in that room, there's also vining plants. They actually installed cables in the wall that go about 70 feet up. So there's, the intention was for there to be, vining plants there. In the lobby, they have some ficus microcarp maclames, which are like a little bit newer to the scene, maybe like 5 or 6 years. There is like a pool area with some monsteras and some other stuff, but really the main focus is this atrium.
All right. So we keep talking about the trees. Let's go there.
Yeah.
What kind of trees are we even talking about here?
Um, so this is a whole discussion point.
That's true. You and I have been having
Yeah,
offline conversations about what is the Friday there.
I
You
mean,
want to start with the common names, and
the
then we
common
could
name that
have an
we
argument
call
about the
them.
scientific name.
Well, so apparently there's like hundreds of common names in different languages and in different places where they are. We call them black olives in the industry, although they're not olives and they are not black. And I mean, they do produce like kind of a dark fruit that's inedible, so don't eat it. And it's got a lot of like tannins in it, but not very often inside. Um,
There's a lot of strange common names out there for tropical
they,
plants in
well,
our industry, and
no,
and
yeah,
often they don't
there
even
are. I
make
mean, it's
sense. But yeah,
yeah, lucky bamboo. Like I mean, it's smart marketing wise. Whoever thought of it, it's great. The cultivars are Shady Lady. There are about six different leaf varieties that I've been aware of. There was just one of these trees installed in the Atlanta Centurion Lounge in the Atlanta airport, and I don't believe that's the Shady Lady. The reason that the Shady Ladies are used so much, and I don't even know that they're the best. I've heard they're not even the best performing in lower light, but they're used more often just for their look. They're smaller leaves. They are symmetrical. They are kind of layered. I've heard it described as like clouds of green, kind of puffy on top of each other. As far as their technical name, where there's a little bit of confusion, most of the time they're referred to a lot of literature they're referred to as Bucida Buceras, which was their original name, and that was Linnaeus who came up with that. My records say here 1759, but then the botanist Charles Wright, who is an American botanist, um, reclassified them as Terminalia Buceras, and that was in
there it is.
1869, according to my records.
Oh, really? 1869. This is
1869. So it's been a while. You'll find stuff, even the University of Florida, even Botanic Gardens. You'll find reference points to both of those names. So I think that in today's language, it's pretty much the Bucida Buceras is the synonym of.
sure.
I'm not sure where to go on this battle because
No,
we
it's
have.
just interesting because I brought it up recently and I was like, no, man, I think it's Terminalia
I, I,
Buceras. And the funny thing is, I thought like that was like new. Like I had just learned that. I forgot. I think it was actually a podcast, and they
yep.
were saying, oh, the actual appropriate scientific name is this. So I bought into it and I was like, oh, it must have been reclassified recently. But then it's funny you did the research and it's like, yeah, this is like over 100 years ago.
I
So
mean, it's hard to
I think we're
know.
splitting hairs here, but
I guess yes and no. I mean, we should know the right names of things, but they're
agreed.
most calatheas are now Goperthias. The Philodendron Salome is a Thamatophyllum. Like
What about
Sansevieria
what
or
about
Dracaena trifasciata.
Dracaena? I was just gonna say, what about
I
a
mean,
snake plant? It's Dracaena,
it's good to.
right?
Somebody's got to start to make the change. I mean, somebody reclassified it, so it is more appropriate for that reason. Um, but yeah, the new word I learned was a basonym, and that is actually the original name on which the new name is based. So Terminalia Buceras is based on Bucida Buceras. So Bucida Buceras is the basonym,
Oh, wow.
which was just something new.
There you go.
Yeah.
So without going too deep
What are we going to call it
you know,
for this? Black olive.
yeah, that's a good point. It's your call, man.
No, let's go with the real name. Let's do it right.
All right.
Terminalia
Terminalia
Buceras.
Buceras. Great. So yeah, we don't have to go any deeper on that. We'll go with Terminalia Buceras. And the reason we thought it was timely to talk about this project specifically, we're trying to always share some knowledge in the indoor or outdoor urban horticultural realm. And this tree, it's been around in the indoor landscape industry for a while as a popular, tried and true indoor tree to use. Though I think historically it always has had challenges on how to care for it, how to introduce it into the right environment, and timely now because I just personally I see it as like being very popular again.
Yeah.
I think it's getting like specified or asked for by designers. It is a beautiful tree. It's always a great tree for character, and different reasons. I think it also translates to an indoor tree without being so tropical. It can reference, maybe
definitely
northeastern trees a little bit more accurately. So we don't have to go that route. I think it seems to be popular right now in the design community. Go ahead.
It's very architectural. There's nothing else quite like it. The small leaves are not common in most tropicals, and it's in architectural magazines.
That's it.
So unfortunately is the real olive trees, which side note don't use, but another one being requested, in other words, and when you unfortunately have designers that do end up feeling very, very strongly about using this tree, and it's hard to sway them away from it because there's nothing quite like it. Ficus benjaminas, I feel, are often, I don't know, overlooked maybe because they're another variety. But honestly, if you get the right trunk form and,
I agree.
They're awesome. But yeah,
them.
you kind of get projects that start with the designer, and that is usually not a good thing unless we're also at the table, which is, a broader discussion.
Yeah, a horticulturalist who can bring some, science and experience to it.
Exactly.
Agreed.
Yeah. Because the conditions are fickle. They're a harder tree. Let's just go there,
Definitely.
They are a messy tree by nature. Yeah.
Well, why don't we go to the specific project at hand? So,
okay, sure.
Because I feel like we're going to learn a lot about where you're about to go with like environmental needs and challenges of the tree, even when you have the right environmental needs and whatnot. So before we get there, what these? So we were brought into this project because hey, we have these. There was three trees, right, in the space.
Yes. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
tall are they? About
I'm not good at that. I think they're like 25 foot tall or so. I mean,
big.
we can post some pictures too if you
Yeah,
want. I'll send you over.
true. So there are like these big architectural trees in this marquee space within this building, and we're brought in because they're not doing well. But like, can you? I don't know. Try to draw a picture of like what were the state of these trees? Like, how bad were they? Like, what did they look
Yeah.
like? Yeah.
I mean, so they're fickle trees to begin with. So a lot of times when they get stressed out, they drop a lot of leaves. The good thing about them is that they will also push out a lot of leaves if they're happy. So that they're kind of like this, they kind of like resurrect themselves. In this particular case, though, they had a lot, and I mean a lot of hemispherical scale on them. The honeydew from that scale, very heavy producer of honeydew, starts to, grow in different types of like fungus on the honeydew, and so they were very, very, very brown. A lot of the leaves were still on the tree; they hadn't dropped, but they were just very, very brown. You could barely see any green on them. So that's the state. I was just speaking to the building manager, and he was like, like, yeah, I mean, we thought they were dead for sure.
Jeez.
Like,
Yeah.
there was panic phone calls. I mean, it's a brand new luxury
What
building.
did you think? Were you like, what were your thoughts at that point? Like, do
Um,
we have a shot here?
yeah, no, we were much more confident because we knew what the problem was. Like, we were able to
Awesome.
identify the insect. We were able to take a really close look at the buds and note that there were, it was new growth trying to push out. So we could see that the
Okay.
trees were really trying to hang in there. Um, And at that time, I don't remember quite what month it was, but I believe it was during the summer. So there was pretty nice light in there, and they looked like they wanted to go. I think and there was shades of green in there. It's just that on first glance, you're like, oh, all you see is brown.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You walk in, you're like, whoa. I don't know. Okay. And this is the trees looked like. Now, I guess back to those environmental challenges. Like, what were the environmental elements look like, or like when you walked the space for the first time, or with follow visits? Um,
It, I,
Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, the light looks good. Okay, it's bright indirect light, but this is where your eyes are a little deceptive because although it's a well lit space, I wouldn't say that it is bright enough to sustain the trees. There's different authorities with different standpoints on the intensity of light that you need for Terminalia Buceras. Sorry, I was trying to remember which name I was using again. I'm just gonna call it Buceras.
There you
So
go.
but one thing that's kind of common along all of these trees is when you get to a specimen size, they just tend to need more light. Part of it is how they were shaded, but other parts is just they're big trees. So when I say specimen, I mean you know. Not a standard grow pot size. So maybe over a 17 inch, sometimes maybe over a 21 inch, but 25 footer is going to take a lot of light. It's a very established, mature tree. So in the winter months, there's not quite enough light for it. So there's
Sunlight. You're talking about.
sorry.
You're talking about. And what are we talking about here? Sunlight or total
Sunlight,
light? Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes, sunlight. So the artificial light isn't really a factor here. There is some artificial light, but I'm discounting it because it isn't quite. It is more architectural lighting than it is
Got it.
meant, in my mind, to sustain the trees. So, yeah, in the winter, you just notice that they become weaker. They drop a lot of leaves. Well, I mean, they always drop leaves, but that's just a characteristic. But in the summer they usually flush out more. Of course, in the summers when the scale sort of explode as well with the new growth. So other than that, pretty standard. Pretty standard indoor environment. There's nothing exceptional about the humidity, although black olives do tend to do better and drop less leaves in higher humidity. And the temperatures pretty much what you would expect. It's such a large atrium that to be able to control any of that, particular to that space, would be outside of what's normal comfort zone, would be pretty I don't know, resource heavy. But I also don't believe that much thought was kind of given to that either, based on other things that we kind of see. The soil actually is they do drain, which is fantastic, for two reasons. One, they're very sensitive to soluble salts, and they like to be very wet, so we can irrigate them pretty often. And they're in kind of like this. I think they call it like a Mississippi mud mix. It's kind of heavy, gravelly, very well draining, which is good. It's good in this circumstance. It's good for aeration. It's good for reassuring that you're not going to overwater, even though that is kind of difficult with these guys. I mean, it's definitely possible, but the one thing you don't want to do, that pretty much all the experts and growers recommend, is just don't ever let them dry out, because that's something they just will never recover from.
Got it.
Yeah.
And how are they irrigated?
They're irrigated through just like drip irrigation. There's like a circular line. There's 3 trees. They're all in the same zone. And basically you can go on the wetter side with black olives. So they generally are pretty moist. And given this mixture, we're definitely good with that.
No challenge. So no challenges for them being on one zone, considering the the desire to water heavily.
No, I mean, in different circumstances there could be issues with that. There's no question about it. Because they're so well draining, we don't really have an issue with that. You cannot really overwater them in this type of circumstance.
Got it.
Yeah.
So then we go back to the light. So what are we talking about here? We're relying on sunlight, and the biggest. So you're talking about the seasonal changes. So we're talking about duration being like the biggest environmental factor.
There's duration,
because the way you explained it too, it's just like it's a narrow.
Yeah.
With 2 towers on either side, a narrow atrium with glass facades on either side. So, and I think that also it's just a reality of it. Like the glass facades, based on the path of the sun, that doesn't give you the perfect time calculation of light in all these urban settings we're talking about generally on this podcast. Is you have other buildings that are in the way and cutting out sunlight as well.
And it goes up a lot, but it does. I don't believe there's a glass ceiling. So if even if it were 15, 20 minutes that the sun were over top direct, like
we wouldn't even get that.
It wouldn't make a difference. But people often say, I mean, this light's a great point, right? I mean, a lot of circumstances we discount whatever natural light there is for various reasons. If you have a skylight, think about it, the sun is only really going to be directly over it for a little while, so it isn't providing the sun for something like this. There is, and the other consideration is the look that they wanting these trees incredibly full, but also multi-layers. The way that the trees are form is one layer on top of another, kind of like big clouds on top of each other. And so the light getting through that canopy is tricky. And then you have 3 large trees that sort of mesh into one, so they start to actually block each other out a little bit. So there's a lot to kind of look at in there. But yeah, in the summer, the light is more intense. The angle is different in the summer than it is in the winter. The light is longer. It's just less direct less direct and less intense. And the time period, you're right, is shorter.
Got it. So okay, so indoor atrium, we got nothing out of the normal humidity or temp wise, but light, we have high quality light, but varying and tricky duration. because of high
Exactly.
quality sunlight.
Exactly.
So that's the stage. What? So this is like a pretty big question. But so what are the biggest challenges in reviving these trees specifically that you walked into with, not in great shape, and how did you begin addressing those challenges?
I mean, there's a lot of challenges here, and there's a lot of
Okay. So where do you
considerations.
want to
No,
start?
it's a really good point because when you're looking at, so we have our own internal IPM pyramid for indoor, right? We also have our own like
What's IPM?
solid,
Just for our
oh,
audience.
integrated
Yeah.
pest management. So there's a best
Cool.
practice in pest management, which is called integrated pest management. And essentially, in a nutshell, it's, you know, it tries to reduce the amount of environmental damage and hazard to you, hazard to the environment. In essence, it kind of looks like you use synthetic pesticides or more harmful, environmental harmful pesticides as a very last resort. But there's also thresholds. So in some cases, you may say, well, I could. It would be, the economic cost of this tree is less than the environmental cost of treating it. So in smaller cases, it might be okay. Well, we'll just refresh a plant. So in this circumstance, not really an option. So challenge one is that the building was built around the plants. Okay, so it's not the first time we've seen this, but they are actually at the size that they're at, like for like, apples to apples. They're irreplaceable in that sense. As far as
Because the
challenges,
building was built around them, and no factor in the development of the building was considered to like create access should we
correct.
want to put another 20
Correct.
foot. Okay,
Correct.
got it.
Yes. Yeah. They were craned in there, and then the building was built around them. Yeah, it's pretty
Got it. And
pretty
there wasn't
wild.
like a special hatch or like glass to pop out to say, hey, we want to like crane in
Exactly.
another 20 or 30-foot tree. Got it. Okay.
No.
So
So
good
that
luck.
leads
We
us
got
to
to
another
revive these
problem.
trees.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're get there. So that the other issues are, so when you're following best practices in pest control, you are okay. There's a lot of considerations to make on the indoor. For instance, in our opinion, it's better to use a systemic, a drench for a plant than to spray something that's aerosolized, because the chances of you breathing in something that's aerosolized or kind of getting into the just into the air of the building is much higher for bystander effect or anything like that. So um, the other problem is that we don't really have means to access the canopies of the trees. So there's another access issue there. So where if these were completely accessible, let's just say they built like a stage around them and a staircase or something like that. Um, we would have first looked at best practices in hygiene. So we probably would have been doing some pretty extreme washing, maybe washing really every week. Um, Also, we would have been able to consider beneficial insects as a method of control. Now, where we started from, though, we did need to take more extreme action just due to the state of the trees. But the challenge being soft scale. Soft scale produces honeydew. Hard scale doesn't. Um, the soft scale is a very difficult insect to treat outdoors and indoors, but indoors we're limited with what we can use. And most everything that you can use systemically is in the same class of pesticide, which is 4A. They're neonics, they call them, but they work on a specific. They have pretty much the same mode of action. There are ones that are more, that are faster. There are ones that are slower, but the mode of action is pretty much the same. So the issue immediately starts to get into resistance management, because the more that you use the same mode of action on the same pest, the more likely, subsequent populations or breeds will become resistant to this practice. This is an area that kids like to play in. This is an area where I don't know, somehow pets are in there. I don't know how that works because they're real trees. But okay, so
Oh, God.
people hang
Yeah.
out in space as so they're very very sensitive. So as far as spraying, it was kind of off the table at first as well. although we were able to get up, do some kind of spraying just to wash stuff down, but it wasn't like, it's not something you could do every day, and it wasn't necessarily easy. You'd have to bring in like equipment to do that, and a
Sure.
lot of prep work on the laying stuff down on the floors and this, that, and the other thing. It's very laborious as
Sure,
well.
and it's a residential building too. You're like, you got an added layer to, like, sometimes we're working in like a commercial atrium where it's like, hey, nobody's here at night or whatnot. But if you're in a residence building, hey, somebody might want to hang out in that space at any moment. Yeah.
No, yeah, and there's library and workrooms that are just the only way to access them is through this atrium. So it's difficult to close it down.
Sure. And that's our job, is to balance that too, to like not just always be on top. Like, they need the beauty and the function of the space, but also we need to take care of it and balance those two things.
Definitely. So I will say that there are products on the market now for scale that we can get into if we ever do like a scale episode that are pretty good as far as like spray.
Wanting to do a scale episode after this?
Well,
we can do it.
I don't know. I swear, it's the only insect I have like everything else. I feel like there's a range of things you can do, best practices in hygiene. But these with their they call them tests, the shell, with those shells. Telling you, it's hard to penetrate.
Don't go too deep. We'll do an episode on scale.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But I will. I do want to note that this particular type of scale, hemispherical scale, like many, they lay eggs. The mother reproduces, doesn't need a male. It can lay up to 1,000 eggs under its shell, and it dies, and then they're protected. So they're almost hatching as born, as crawlers. Because they've been protected that whole time. So they're tough ones. That's all I'm getting to.
Okay.
Yeah, and the building doesn't had to wash the floor like every day for a while just because of the amount of honeydew that they produce is pretty extreme. So yeah, I don't want to jump ahead.
No, go ahead. So like, how do we start implementing some of the solutions?
Oh, how did we? I mean, so
yeah, I mean, like, you go through it. I think that's important. I think we set like the stage for how rough the shape of the trees were in, and obviously this scale is the biggest issue here.
Yeah, I'll go through it in detail. Cool. Like, no problem. I mean, the most recommended and probably best systemic that we use is Safari. It is highly regulated because it is harmful for honeybees, and that whole class of pesticides is. So it's something you have to be really, really thoughtful and careful about. But it has a very high uptake into the trees, very quick uptake, and so using it essentially a systemic is the tree is absorbing that poison, so to speak. And when the insect eats the leaves or tries to suck into the branches, they're ingesting that poison, and thereby, it kills them. So we implemented that pretty much straight away. That plus washing the trees, plus pretty much just removing anything, any of the brown leaves where, crawlers or scale could be. And honestly, it was pretty bare, but I'm going to say it, maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks, definitely within 2 months, they were flush green again. I mean, they were really trying to push out. They were very vigorous trees at this point. The light was right on, and the building was really ready to sort of drop anything for us to get these right. So we started with that. We also so we basically implemented a program where we were going to do that on a regular basis. There's some things that we've learned from this whole process that I can certainly get into. Best practices that we might have implemented had we known certain things at the time, or had I, come up with the plan. There's always a learning lesson from stuff like this. But we implemented the control with Safari. I think it's a 90-day, so like a quarterly treatment. The first application really knocked them back very, very well. And so we were hoping with kind of like a every other month or monthly spray, or as much as we could really get it in. And I think it turned out to really be quarterly, with just some kind of soapy water, just to like wash down the trees would also help with any emergence. Although we weren't good enough on tracking some of the emergence, it's definitely a best practice outdoors that should be done indoors as well.
What do you mean?
So the most vulnerable stage of scale is the crawler stage. And without going into a deep dive in it, when new scales start to emerge, which is usually in the spring outdoors, when you start to see them, which they're almost impossible to see, we use actually double-sided sticky tape on some of the branches. When you see them, you spray. You drop everything and you spray. Whatever you use is whatever you use, but they're soft-bodied at that time. They're highly mobile. They're spreading to all of the branches of the trees, So we did a quarterly treatment of the systemic, and they would come back heavy in the summer and the spring, which I'd expect. But indoors, I feel like we were getting a little bit of population burst. I think it was less seasonal than it might be outdoors. Although when we had more growth and the temperatures were a little warmer, definitely start to see them emerge at a little bit of a faster rate. So the main issues were really honeydew, treating. I think that was the first year we did that on a quarterly basis. Second year, we tried to say we want to hold back a little bit. Maybe if we start to notice that a problem's emerging, we would treat, only in the sense that we just didn't want to overuse pesticides, and we were kind of hoping that maybe they might have been manageable, or a bit more manageable. I mean, at a certain point, for a couple of years, the main issue was just honeydew on the floor. And when you start to notice that, we would kind of do a treatment and assess it. But that was our main issue. Where
What
we
do you
are
mean?
today,
So like
yeah.
that was too reactive.
It
Or
was
like
too
not
reactive.
quick.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like,
absolutely
hey,
was.
like if it
Yeah.
gets so bad that like the honeydew is like so like it's like hitting the floor, it must be bad up there. And then we'd be treating versus like let's see if we could spot some activity at a more like nascent stage and then treat
Definitely.
quicker. Okay, got it.
Definitely. There should have been a more proactive approach to the trees. Um, there's not necessarily a one size fits all solution. I think, I think this is always like kind of a thing. If you don't know what you're getting into from the get go, and you say, okay, well, we're charging this much to a client, or we have this much labor, and then you look at what it actually takes. Our motto is always doing the right thing. So, looking at it from that perspective, that's not the issue. But I think that it just kind of a word of caution, like when you go into a project like this, and the client in this particular case was like, no, we can only pay so much. You have to account for your time. You have to do it right. Like there's not really, you can't acceptably do something halfway when it comes to, irreplaceable trees with a heavy scale infestation that are
Good point.
pretty inaccessible. So, I can talk about some of the other things we would have done here. We keep alluding to the fact that things may not be going smoothly. I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of where we're at now. Yeah,
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we can go there. I'm sure like I don't want to go there because it's an ongoing challenge, but also just to let's talk about the whole timeline. How like this is not we're not talking months here. This is like a few years now at this
yeah.
point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've been maintaining it for like 3 to 4 years. So
Yeah.
my role sort of shifted a little bit more, to being brought in more or less when there's problems. Something that, I'm looking to change more, especially when you have accounts of this size, because we are a lot of times it's a fairly independent job. You have a horticulturist that works for you. Potentially, they go around to accounts, that they may take ownership of, but you're relying on a lot of information to be passed and communication to be passed to you. So if something looks bad, you just have to have that trust. If you have, a couple hundred accounts that may fall under your, management. So it's just the communication is another incredible important facet
Agreed.
to this.
It's a whole nother
Yeah,
episode itself too.
for
But
sure.
agreed. So three
So
going on 4 years, we've been taking care of it. So to
what I'll
get
say is,
to the challenge, you're right. Like we were brought in to this job. Trees were like, on the edge. Brought them back, I think 2 years in or so. I remember seeing the transformation pictures from before to after, and we can share those. Unbelievable work. I think that's probably around the time we won an award for the horticultural care and the revival of them. Well earned. And then now going into the 4th year, challenges don't stop, right? We got living
no, they don't
trees.
stop, and I think we're just too comfortable with the patterns of them kind of looking weaker in the winter and kind of relying on the light in the summer to bring them back, and relying on the fact that what we did in the past will always work in the future. So those are just some reflection points. But so currently one of the trees is no longer with us.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned this recently, but it's 100% confirmed. Like it's not gonna make it.
Yeah. I mean, everybody keeps saying, "Oh, just bring it back like you did the first time," but unfortunately, this tree it is not. It's not with us anymore. There's 3 trees originally. 2 of them actually look great because we implemented some emergency measures, so we were able to get up there and spray a little bit and do a little bit more, but it was just a little bit too late for the 3rd tree, which is the middle tree, and I'm sure you guys will see pictures of that too. So it's completely gone. It's a giant tree. We've already talked about the fact that they built the building around it, so we're dealing with that as a challenge right now, but every challenge brings an array of solutions. So we got some pretty cool things, that we're going to share with the client as far as like proposed solutions. Some really out of the box stuff to, planting in a smaller, Buceras tree.
Cool. No, I know. And you're like, we were talking about this before. It's like, hey, are we gonna go into the current challenges? And I think we thought it was important, right?
Yeah,
this is urban landscaping, indoors and out, and urban landscaping it's not easy, and there are always going to be wins and losses, and sometimes the losses are in your control, some of them are out. But I think the thing that you do a phenomenal job with, and I know our team does, is we own that, and we're solution people. And we don't give up, and and without question, we're passionate. So we're in there like, hey, we'll fight to the end. How do we revive these trees? We did. 2 of them are still doing well, and like how do we evolve and continue to make the indoor urban landscape thrive, no matter what the challenge is.
Yeah, it's a punch to the gut for me. I take it personally.
We always do. I think that's important. That's why we are who we are, and we're passionate about our crafts. Like, we're gonna take it personally. I know people say like, "Oh, don't take it personally." I was like, "Yeah, no, I know, I get that, but we love doing it right."
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I know that me today, like this version of me sitting here today, could have saved that 3rd tree. I'm very confident that I could have done it had I implemented different measures and had we been just a little bit more on top of it.
I appreciate that. That candor is important, and that's important to share, and super mature to like put it that way. And so go there. Like you did a couple lessons, like things you would have done differently. Is there anything else you would share on reflections?
Yeah, no, let's talk about it. So I think it's really important for companies to have a role like mine. So I feel really great to be in this role. But why I'm saying that is it allows for time to do deep dives and research where maybe other people have a lot on their plate and other responsibilities and kind of dive in on the surface. one of the things that's an issue, I think, kind of industry wide, is best practices consistently, particularly when it comes to technical information like using pesticides, having an interior specific integrated pest management program, and tools like that. So having a series of products, best practices. So I was lucky enough to, over a couple months during the winter, do a very, very deep dive into not only best practices and scale, but I did some interviews with a consulting entomologists we work with. I spoke to two people who are kind of consultants for down in Florida for growers and got some of their recommendations. And I just did a lot of work at what does a good IPM program look like? What are the actual effective tools that we have in terms of insecticides, pesticides? What are their risks? What are their benefits? When should they not be used? What's appropriate? And there's a lot of variables in there, and that's almost its own thing, just because it's mind numbing. You can look at international treaties that tell you which insecticides are causing the most environmental damage, but then you go to the manufacturer's website and they have pictures of bees and children. So there's also the EPA label is different than the OSHA label, which is on the essays. But that, I guess, what I'm kind of alluding to is that because I was able to do some deep dive here and really just curiously trying to understand best practices, we were able to come up with quite a few and a lot of documentation on what we should do. It's just the problem again was just that it doesn't really exist. It exists in piecemeal form. A lot of pesticide information is outdated, and a lot of regulations change. What I would have done if I was moving forward, I would have insisted upon way to we got the labor right, number one. How much it's going to take to really keep these things going. Insisted upon access to the canopies whenever we needed. I would have insisted on the artificial lighting being, up to spec, so actually supplementing in the winter months and trying to keep them consistently vigorous. I would have pretty much demanded that when we need to close down the atrium or when we need to do something, maybe one. I mean, as we do with other kind of iconic or very special projects, we have one day a month at least that we can, or every other week, that we can shut it down and do what we need to do, to maintain the trees. Whether that looks like getting in there and pruning, whether that looks like, just soapy water, scrubbing something down. I mean, and analyzing the trees, and then of course scale crawlers and doing kind of monitoring and scouting, which is at your basis of any integrated pest management program. Monitoring the populations. Are we doing well? Are we doing less well? Was this treatment just as effective, less effective? Mark down on your calendar when you start to see sticky and problems. So there's a whole host of best practices that really could have been followed. I think it was, I think we were just too reliant on. Again, there aren't that many products that can be used. We were too reliant on one kind of methodology, and then just became too comfortable with where we were. We needed to be more vocal and more forceful about our practices and keeping up with them.
Interesting, and we got lucky a little bit. Like I think you made a really good point about the light, and like one of the lessons learned is like we should have advocated for more supplemental effective lighting earlier. It's like essentially like is a hard lesson learned only literally through practice. It's like we had a few years of getting by, and we were on the threshold. It sounds, it's like, hey, they really struggled to the winter, but then they just got there, and then when the summer kicked in and with our control, like we got them back in the summer, and we did that for a couple of seasons, but we were really pushing it every winter. So
definitely,
and we learned that. Then like the third year, we're like, man, we really were living on the edge. We should have gotten artificial lights so they're not just like ebbing and flowing every year. We gotta maintain them throughout.
We looked at the timeline too, Mark, and we were able to kind of see that die back, grow back, and really, if you looked at the list last summer, because this is a relatively new, I would say this really November, December was when this trees kind of drastically went down. But when you saw the trees in August, they just didn't. This one just didn't look. None of them looked quite as vigorous as we would expect over a summer. Um, was there a little bit of I think it was a funny group of circumstances, actually. I think the building got much better at cleaning the floor. Number one.
Oh, interesting.
Funny enough.
So like
But
your metric you were using to like gauge activity
one of the
was
metrics,
like,
right?
was like
Yeah,
just
one of
like
the
didn't.
metrics.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
But I also think that, so in a way, I think that the scale were there, but the trees looked acceptable to the team because the highlight was maintaining what they had. Although what they had, the leaves, the amount of leaves and the health that they had was, again, it was just kind of, it was being balanced by the amount of light there was. And as soon as that light sort of went away, um, this middle tree that was a little bit weaker, you could see through the years, and particularly at the end of this summer, just sort of. I mean, it really went down very pretty quickly, which is really surprising
Hmm.
to me in the sense that most of the time when you see something decline in a 30-day period or more than that, it usually means that there was another stressor. It usually means there's an abiotic stressor, which is temperature. Somebody poured something toxic into the tree pit, and I won't rule out that something weird did happen, but usually insects are a little bit slower, and so you can usually manage them. And I think that was another layer of maybe comfort, that hey, if it gets really bad, we can pull out something heavier. As it turned out, we did pull out something heavier, and um, then I mean heavier by actually the it's an interesting insecticide, but it actually has no warning label and it's actually pretty safe. But anyway, by the time we were able to actually spray, it was just too late. And of course, the other two trees looking, fabulous now because we actually got up there, demanded that we spray, demanded that they close the lobby, demanded that it was closed for the entire day. So we're following. There's a lot that goes in with spraying and using things.
Definitely.
Reentry intervals, can't reenter for 12 hours or whatever it means. So it's an inconvenience, but it has to happen.
Got it.
Yeah, definitely. There's other things that could have been done too. I
No,
think
I
the
think
way
it's
that
awesome. I think that's some really thoughtful, post analysis of the situation. Live and learn.
yeah, I mean, also if you look at the way that the trees are, and we were talking about well draining, like rocky kind of substrate, you're also dealing with a lot of nutrients that just roll right out. So
Interesting.
having a
Yeah.
nutrient program that's tailored to that type of soil, we've been investing a lot of time and energy into understanding and researching and interviewing consultants and researchers for microbial root kind of growth and also some for foliar. So like beneficial bacteria and fungi that like you can add
Sure.
to the soil that so more of that practice too could have potentially helped us here just to say, hey, the trees look good, but let's keep fortifying them and let's keep treating them, great because we want them to live a long, happy time,
Got it.
happy
Cool.
life. Yeah.
Right. So I think I'm going to try to, you know, close out the episode maybe with some like, pushing you for some advice. I think one of the biggest challenges, we deal with as, urban landscapers, especially in the indoor setting is, not even just during the, like, hey, we want to add, indoor landscape. Sometimes we're just like brought in last, which is a challenge within itself. But even beyond that, in this case, it's, oh, we got to care for these plants, right? So we got to
Yeah.
keep them alive. So we're brought in as indoor horticulturalists last, or like as an afterthought, and try to, save the day, which was something we pride ourselves on. We've done that with a lot of accounts, this one and other major accounts. We came in, after the thought and found a way, to solve the problem and keep the the indoor landscape alive and then thriving. But I guess what would be your advice on this end? What should we be looking to other disciplines from the design community and construction to like consider to ensure that indoor landscapes have better success?
I mean, I was reading a book from the 1970s written by an AIA, an architect, and their comment was, it's time for us to work with different specialties and bring landscape architects, bring horticulturists, indoor landscapers to the table from the get-go, because we all have our specialization. Sadly, we're in 2024, and I don't know how often that happens. It's a challenge, and it's something that I think we need to work on as an industry to kind of get at the table. I think there's a lot of information that we can share, but you know, I think there's multiple problems. One is just kind of the lack of knowledge about plants in general by the general population, and so kind of using them as props or just kind of throwing them. But when it comes to landscape architects, I think that there's a bit of a misunderstanding. Obviously, not with everybody, but in general about how different indoor landscapes are than outdoor. A lot of variables that you can presume outdoors, as far as the sun, as far as replacing a plant, even as far as sourcing a plant and that whole period of acclimation, they're different. So we've actually developed a checklist for landscape architects of like, here's some considerations that are different than outdoors and that just need to be just make sure you're taking a look at this. One of them being, there should be a plan for renewal. If the soil needs to be renewed, if a plant needs to be renewed. I mean, plants do have lifespans, and sometimes the indoor environment can make them grow in unusual ways, and at certain points it could become safety hazard or they're just lacking vigor. So it really needs to be thought out, how the space is going to be used, what the environment is, expectations in sourcing and acquiring plants. It's a different ballgame. You can't just go and grab boxwoods being grown outside from a local nursery. It's much more specialized, and we've learned a ton over the years. And there's a lot of really specialized knowledge that we're happy to share. It's just kind of need to know that somebody wants to hear you out. So I mean, as the people who maintain them, we're gonna really tell you what to do because it's in our best interest for everything to look good.
Agreed. And in everyone's best interest, I think. No, it's phenomenal advice. And it is 2024, and I think we sit in there, especially on this project, saying like, oh, I wish we were we're at the table earlier, and there's a lot of work to be done there. But I think we're both optimists. And I was just speaking at New York Build. I know you know that, and I sat on a panel with four other architects, and we all seemed to share that sentiment. Sentiment was multidisciplinary approach wins, right? We all want to build beautiful buildings and spaces in the urban setting, and people do cherish landscape in the outdoor urban environment as well as the indoor urban environment, but they're believing that like, yeah, we need to it needs to be that's not their expertise. Obviously ours isn't their expertise of actually building and designing buildings and spaces, but all parties need to be aligned and brought to the table in order to have these beautiful buildings with landscapes intertwined within them come to life and sustain. Any final thoughts before we close out on this project?
I just want to do a very quick sum, like 5 bullet points maybe on best practices for black olives or for Terminalia Buceras. If you mind?
Yeah, that's connected I think final thoughts on this project, which is centered around Terminalia Buceras for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Go for it.
Point 1 is, okay, they are evergreen and they appear evergreen, but they do drop a lot of leaves. Go in with that expectation. Okay. Number 2, don't ever let the soil dry out. If you do, that is gonna get them. Number 3, interestingly, they grow in salt marshes and actually on beaches in Guatemala, I've been told. But but salt water is not the same as soluble salts, and they're very, very susceptible to them. Um, and last one, and almost most critically and least applied, is light. Light. You're going to read a lot of different people's thoughts on light. If you're going to go to the old, let's not worry about quality. Let's just talk about intensity, foot candles. My suggestion is over 600 foot candles on the tree. You can go to our old um, industry guys from the National Association of Landscape Professionals. They're going to suggest over 500 for it to thrive. They may allow for it to be less to just hang in there, but you need the light, and that must be established from day one, because you just won't be successful without it.
Awesome.
And that's it. That's my sum.
Dude, love it. But I think because you've been here before, those are the final thoughts on that project for that episode. But I always end with a fun question, because we're just a passionate group, a passionate team. We love our craft. We all have our specific craft within our business. So what are you currently just thinking about a lot or passionate about in your craft right now?
Flowering plants inside.
There you go.
One is the vinding plants that we're investing a lot of interest in, but two are just flowering plants that might have been considered hobbyist. But I think that the more refined our craft is, the more able we're going to be able to do, I want to say, specialized boutique kind of things. So there's no reason. The streptocarpus that I've been sharing with you just got it to bloom. It's hanging in there. It's super easy. I've never grown one before. I'm very pleasantly.
Where's the hybrid? Isn't it like hybrid with little guys on it?
It's called a solar eclipse, but it's got a lot of different, buds on it here. The solar eclipse name is pretty cool and appropriate. There's also the streptocarpella, which is a hybrid.
That's it.
And this thing, I actually last night. So this thing is just. It's been flowering for me for months. It seems to be bulletproof. I'm pretty amazed. I'm not torturing them yet to see how far I can push them, but I'm amazed. And then last night I was kind of looking online, and they were selling them for outdoor uses, like 10-inch baskets and like giant ones. And in my head, I'm like, whoa, having a whole planter bed full of them blooming against a window. How cool would that be? So I think there's an opportunity. I think flowers we've used traditionally as rotational items, but or like a color program, or we're bringing you a bromeliad for 8 weeks or 10, whatever it may be, or kalanchoe, whatever you want to call it. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for other stuff, and I think that our people want that growth and that knowledge. And I think with the lights that we can bring into spaces, if we were able to, we can do much more unique things than we are today. So I am obsessing about flowering plants and vines.
Awesome, man. I love it. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
That's it, man. That's a wrap for cool. For this episode. Thank you, Andrew. It's always I always love just chatting with you, man. Your knowledge and just is obviously unparalleled, but I just love the passion, because it's that mindset of like, whatever we know today, we're always thinking about what we don't know and what we can improve upon. So I just see that like grit in your approach to the craft too. So I just enjoy that, man. So thanks, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Let's do it again.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your thoughts with us today. And thank you to our listeners, as always, for being here and spending your time with us. If you guys have any questions, ideas for future episodes, or my favorite, any constructive feedback, please email us at podcast@johnmini.com. And a big final thank you to all our clients at John Mini Distinctive Landscapes. You guys allow us to make our passion our profession. None of this would be possible without your ongoing support and vision to bring nature to the places people live, work, and play. This episode's a wrap. I hope you guys have a great day and you find a moment in your busy day to cherish the nature around you.